All right. Hello and welcome to Able Voices. This is a podcast with stories and solutions for a better disability system. And it's a project of Able Americans, a nonprofit think tank working on disability issues. I am so excited today to have Mary Marslender, and she is just has a wealth of knowledge and experience and is currently the president and founder of Leverage PR, her own firm based in the Washington, D.C. area that she established back in 2013. She has this wealth of knowledge and depth from her work in public relations, political communications, crisis management. It seems like she's worked about everywhere on Capitol Hill, the House, the Senate, and for several members of Congress. She worked at think tanks, and her expertise spans a wide variety of domestic issues. But today we are going to be talking about her passion as an advocate for the disability community and her daughter who has cystic fibrosis. So Mary's going to tell us more about that. She was appointed by President Trump to the National Council on Disability and by Governor Glenn Youngkin to the Virginia Board for people with disabilities. So, Mary, I am so excited to talk to you today and just start with your story. We just talked about your deep work in politics and comms. How did you then arrive from all of that experience to disability advocacy?
Well, first, Rachel, thanks for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. And I also just admire you and your work and everything that you're doing in the advocacy space, which I know is sometimes thankless and it's difficult, and you're fighting the bureaucracy. So thank you. I appreciate that. How did I get started in this space? It was somewhat accidental. It's not like I woke up one day and was like, I'm going to become an advocate in the disability space. It just kind of happened. My second daughter has cystic fibrosis, and when she was born, it was a life-threatening genetic disorder. She thankfully has gotten on some miracle drug therapeutics that will cause her to live a full, healthy life, which is great. But at the time of her birth, she didn't have that outcome. And so when you're a parent, and I think a lot of parents of kids that aren't sick or have a disability kind of saw this a little bit during COVID. Like we used to think like, okay, you go to a doctor, they tell you something, you listen, it's the rule of law. We learned that we really have to kind of challenge what they're telling you, and you have to be the advocate for the caregiver, the person that you're advocating for. And so early on, I just realized I have to advocate for her. Like I have to push for her in these spaces. I would see problems, I would see hurdles that weren't right. And I just thought, like, okay, if not me, then who? And so I would just find a way to write an op-ed, to call a congressional member, to push back, to elevate, to do anything that I could to try to fix the problem. And I know it's very similar to you and your story. It's not something you thought you would ever probably be in that space of, but you've been presented with that. And so you kind of just do the best you can do.
Wow. Gosh, I have so many follow-up questions on that. And then I can't imagine, that you're trying to be a mom, you're trying to do the normal mom things, but then to add advocacy on top of that is another full-time job. Um, I I'm so first, I don't really know the background. And for our listeners, you said access to this life-saving drug. Can you talk about how you got access to that for your daughter and what that looked like?
Yeah, so she was born in 2014, and she she received Trikafta when she was about 7 years old. I somewhat stalked the FDA website. I knew this miracle drug was coming down the pipeline. A lot of the viewers that you have, I'm sure, are super educated on this. But in terms of drugs, when it gets approved, it starts with adults first. So it's 12 and older, and then it's 7 to 12, and then 0 to 7. And so she was in that middle range. And so I had heard and read so many stories about how Trikafta had helped adults that were living with cystic fibrosis. It's not a cure, but it corrects the deformity in the gene. And there are stories of individuals that were in ICU beds in hospitals that got on this drug and then were running marathons. I mean, absolutely miraculous. She's had, since she's been on it, she gets a lung chest x-ray every year. Her doctor said her chest x-ray is perfectly normal. It's healthier than more non-individuals with CF that she's seen as a
Wow.
pulmonologist. So it's just a miracle drug. And so I really just was waiting for the FDA to announce this drug for her. She got on it, and it's just caused her to live a full life. So it's been great. I know a lot of individuals don't have that access to the life-saving therapeutics, and that's hard, or they're fighting health insurance or the bureaucracy of government. I know a lot of individuals in Australia and in England, individuals that have CF, they don't have a healthcare system that affords them the ability to get those drugs, and it's extremely heartbreaking.
Wow. Wow. I did not realize that. So is this, and I'm sorry, I don't know more about the drug. Is it past clinical trials and it's totally approved, or is it still, was this a clinical trial?
Nope, it was already approved. I mean, now a newborn that's born with cystic fibrosis today could start the drug tomorrow.
Wow.
So they've even come up with a different one called Trek, and they're coming up with different therapeutics that, there's almost 2,000 different variants of CF. So there are some individuals with CF that cannot, like, they don't have a life-saving drug that can help them. And so the pharmaceutical company Vertex is trying to aim towards that. But yeah, there's a lot of countries that use this government style healthcare, and alarmingly, many of them use QALY, which I know we both have talked and are well versed on, and they use that as an excuse to deny someone like CF this life-saving therapeutic. And if you are a parent of a child with CF and you're seeing these stories, these miraculous life-changing stories of individuals who are living like full lives, they're not coughing constantly. They're not having to do numerous breathing treatments or chest physical therapy every single day. They're not in the hospital. They're not culturing these bad bacteria. They're not having to get lung transplants. You want the same access to that drug for your child. And unfortunately, a lot of these government run health systems are denying it based on, discriminatory things against those that are sick and those with disabilities.
Wow. That is such an incredible story when you just think about what wasn't on the market 20 years ago and the innovations and what that means for your daughter. So
Yeah.
does that what does that mean for your daughter? What has
Yeah.
that meant for her life?
Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned that about the innovations, because I remember a few years ago, she was like, Mom, why do I have to take all these pills? And I was like, no, you're asking the wrong question. You should be saying, why do I get to take all these pills? And I explained to her, you live in the greatest country in the world where the most innovative minds have come up with this therapeutic. And like, you have the opportunity because of the healthcare system to have access to this drug. And it is such a blessing. She would, in her younger years, she would culture some pretty alarming and scary bacteria in her lungs, which would cause her to be hospitalized. She would have to get a PICC line to the heart. Um, that's how like strong the antibiotics were in order to help fight the disease and eradicate it from her body. As she would get older, like running and activities like that would cause a lot of coughing, a lot of lung issues, and just the amount of time of when she would get sick with a normal cold. Like you and I would get a cold and we'd probably get over it in a few days. It would be lingering for her. It would cause just this buildup of mucus and bacteria in her lungs, and then it would lead to a lung infection, which would mean that she'd be hospitalized, would be on antibiotics, would be on inhaled medications. And she hasn't been in the hospital in such a long time. She hasn't had any negative lung cultures, and she hasn't been sick. Now, when she gets a cold, it's a few days and she gets over it and she can go about her day and live a normal life as a child.
Wow. That that is truly incredible. And I can't imagine the relief off of your chest with
Yes.
that. Well, thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
real personal story. And you know, as you're telling that, I'm thinking, I can't imagine being in these other countries where this is not even an option on the table. Or you have to be incredibly fortunate to be able to have access. Um, we talked about the QALY band, so certainly we're going to get into your work there and explain to people what a QALY is if you're not following this closely. But more broadly, can you talk about what barriers are? My tumor that paralyzed me was from a really rare disease, an ependymoma tumor. And I keep praying that medical breakthroughs happen in the next 2 years. If I have a recurrence, and just how amazing it is that I can hope for that. In the next 10 years, we might have a breakthrough that cures, brain cancer and these other tumors. And it, I want to do everything I can to allow that innovation to continue. What do you see as barriers to, your drug being able to be used more widely, to be less expensive, or other cures out there developed?
Wow, yeah, that's a really great question. Well, as I mentioned, some of the state governments, like in Australia and in England, I mean, you'll see these videos on YouTube of children holding signs, like pleading their government to get access to this drug that they know will help them live a long life. So I do think that level of bureaucracy and that universal healthcare system that is constantly being pushed as this end all be all, it means everyone can have access to everything. In reality, we know that's not the case. We know a lot of these life saving therapeutics are then denied and individuals can't access them. So that's definitely a huge barrier. I think that there's a lot of bureaucracy in the healthcare system and on the state level that parents and caregivers have to deal with. And it's confusing, it's complex. Healthcare is complex. I used to want to get a master's degree in healthcare policy, and I shadowed one class and I was like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely horrific. I want nothing to do with this because it's very, oh gosh, there's just so many layers to it. And any parent who's ever had to fight insurance to cover some tests that a doctor ordered that they said would be covered, and then later they get this surprise bill that it's not covered, and then they're fighting the decision by the healthcare company. And oh, by the way, they don't really tell you all of the criteria that went into the decision. They'll just say some generic term like it's not medical necessary or something like that. And you're having to, like, with little information, push back and try to advocate. And so it's complex, it's confusing. I think that's a huge hurdle. I think in terms of therapeutics, like having the best and the brightest minds, scientists or pharmaceutical companies that want to make drugs. CF is a rare disease. There's only about 40,000 individuals that have it. And, and so it's not usually cost effective for, pharmaceutical companies to want to come up with a drug that helps such a small population of individuals. And so anyone in the rare disease community, anyone that has a rare disease or is advocating for someone with a rare disease understands this completely, because there's not enough of a financial incentive for these pharmaceutical companies to come up with something because it doesn't help a larger number of people. And that's frustrating. I've seen that a lot. I've done some, superbug advocacy, people that become resistant to antibiotics. My daughter has been on a lot of antibiotics. Thankfully, she hasn't in a while, but eventually you become resistant to that. And I'm trying to get pharmaceutical companies to fight this, because once you become immune to it, other antibiotics don't work. But to them, antibiotics for most people are just such a short-term use, and it's so limited. So there's no need for them to try to fix it, because it's only a small amount of people who have to constantly be on them over and over again. And so getting people to care about that kind of stuff when it only helps a small amount of individuals is tough, and it's a hurdle in and of itself.
No, that is so true about it being complicated and the financial incentives, and how your advocacy in just speaking up really matters, because like I know you have to be kind of a squeaky wheel to
Yep.
to get your case heard with the insurers, to push things along at the national level on this kind of advocacy with companies. So that's so critically important. What advice would you give somebody starting out on a rare disease journey with a child or with themselves, and just feeling like everything is, I mean, what you're describing to me, it feels like pushing a rock up the hill all the time. What advice
Yeah.
would you give to somebody who's living that?
Yeah, it does. Sometimes it does seem like you've invested all this time into one effort and you didn't really move much. But there are times where you really make a difference. And, I've had people come up to me that have said, like, I read this op-ed that you wrote about this, and it really helped me with something with my child, and like, just thank me. And that to me, I was just like, wow, I don't write things just for people to see, but sometimes I write them because I'm like, no one else is writing this. This is ridiculous. Something needs to happen. So that is helpful. I would say just use your voice the best you can, even if you don't think it's going to make an impact. Someone could find it, someone could see it. I would also say partner with people in the same rare disease community because, the boomeracicin and gunneracicin are giants in the field of CF. Gunner has CF, Boomer, award-winning quarterback, sports analyst. I got to know both of them and partnered with them on op-eds and advocacy and issues. And it was actually Gunner who introduced me to the QALY issue. And I remember I was traveling and I was in a hotel room and he's like, this issue. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so big. Like I need to I was watching these videos to explain the complexity of it because it didn't seem real. But, just having those friendships that you forge with people in the community and like, okay, what have you done on this? What can I do to help? What skills do I have that I can come alongside you to help with? And that's the thing. People sometimes think, well, I don't know anyone in Congress or I don't have these skills. Like, no, your voice is powerful. A parent's voice is so powerful, particularly one who's advocating for a child or those with the disability themselves is so powerful. And so, like you said, be that squeaky wheel, push back, use your voice. You never know who's going to hear you, who's going to read it, who's going to see it. Do what you can to make a difference. And I think the more people that do that show the numbers that we have in these efforts, and it really helps make a difference.
That is so, so true. And it is so encouraging when even one person says, "Oh my gosh, I just felt seen by what you said or wrote." And that's really important. Even the one person impact is worth it.
It is. It really is.
And
Yeah.
now you referenced a few times the QALY ban. Now, a lot of people who don't live in this world don't know what
Yes.
that is. What is QALY and what's the kind of political implication of QALY?
Yeah. Sometimes I wish I didn't know what it was either. But it stands for quality adjusted life years. And it's basically a methodology that state governments or health insurance or even federal departments, we've seen it being used at the VA, use as a reasoning to discriminate against the elderly, the sick, and those with disabilities. So it's really complex how they figure it out, but basically they survey average Americans and rate individuals. They give them a number. Now they will say that that's not true and they'll push back on it, but we have a lot of data to support it. When I served on the National Council on Disability, which you mentioned, they had done a report on QALY. And when I was there serving, I encouraged them to do a follow up report pushing back on it and also trying to figure out what states were actually using this failed methodology. But it's countries will use it and they'll say, like, well, this therapeutic costs so much money and this individual is sick or elderly or has this disability. So we're going to not, it's not cost effective for us to give them access to this drug because their life expectancy is already so low, or they're already so sick, or they're so old as it is, which is actually absolutely horrific
Mm.
to give an individual a marker or say they are less valuable because of the disease, the ailment, or the age that they are is so evil. It's just pure evil and it's
Mhm.
discriminatory. And so this methodology has been used. It's been pushed by a lot of individuals that I don't think have great motives. And so it's been a reasoning to deny access to care. And we don't really know right now what states use it in their state healthcare systems.
Wow.
I know that Oklahoma banned it. We we've been working on trying to figure out specifically what states use it. And it's hard because I'll talk to some governors and they're just not certain.
Wow.
It's not that they have to expose it. And like I mentioned earlier, a healthcare company can deny something for an individual, and they won't give the full reason as to why it's denied. They'll
Wow.
give a generic reason. And so QALY could have been one of the reasonings that was mentioned or advocated for. And then that individual doesn't receive access to that life saving therapeutic or that care or that procedure because of it. And so
Wow.
we don't really know. There's a lot of these things being discussed in boardrooms with surgeons and doctors and psychological individuals and ethicists. And we don't really have that full information. It's very scary. It's a very alarming. It's why some individuals with CF in some other countries have been denied access. They are citing QALY because of it. We know that it was used at one point in the VA. There's meeting notes of them discussing it and referencing it. It's very alarming. It's very troubling, and it's something that needs to be removed and needs to be prioritized. It's so complex, and it's also really hard to get people to pay attention to it or even find out how widely it's being used.
Wow. That is just the fact that it is not transparent adds almost another layer of
I know.
wrongness to it. Wow.
It's so scary. Yep.
And, so at Able Americans, we talk a lot about a culture of life versus a culture of death broadly.
Yeah.
And I think, just my experience now. So I've been a member of the disability community 7 years now. And I say, like, my blinders have come off because I'm around lots of other people with different kinds of disabilities. I have a physical disability, but you've got intellectual and developmental disabilities. You've got the rare disease community that you're a part of. And everybody's experiences are so different. But I do think that we share this kind of change in how we see people and people's inherent value and worth, and just this rating people based on they might have a shorter life expectancy is just insane on many levels. I mean, reason based, a person who is quote fully healthy could go get hit by a bus tomorrow. None of us
Exactly.
can play
Exactly.
God with that. And my diagnosis, when they gave it to me, they said there's a good chance you could die from this surgery. That is an option. And so that anybody can think that they have this formula to tell you how much quality life you have left is really insidious on many levels. But then using it to ration care, like you're talking about, is even worse. To deny someone, let's say the worst case, there aren't very many quality adjusted life years left. You're not going to fight for the best quality of
Yeah.
life that they have left. That is so counter to the Hippocratic Oath, to what we think medicine should be. Um, and like you said, it's hard. Healthcare is so complex to help people understand this. What do you think are some good, since you are a communications expert, some good ways to help people understand that no matter your disability or disease, that all lives are worthy of living, and the medical community supporting that the best they can.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's I think it's difficult. I think, like you said, the more you're in this community with individuals, your blinders come off and you can see that each individual has value. Everyone is uniquely made in the image of God, is what I believe, and I know it's what you believe. And every individual has value. And so to say that that person doesn't have value because they are older or sick or not able to do things that some individuals physically are able to do, it's evil and it's discriminatory. And so the more that people can speak out against it, I served on NCD, the National Council on Disability, and the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities. The Virginia board, both of them, but specifically, I just finished my tenure in the Virginia board, and they did such a great job. The executive director there was so compassionate, so great, valuing all individuals, meeting them exactly where they are with their needs and showing that there's something that they have to contribute to life and that their life has value. I mean, what message do we send to these individuals if we're like, well, you can't get access to this care or this provision, or you're not as worthy as somebody else? Like, what society says that to the individuals around them, the human beings? I mean, it's so demoralizing, and it honestly diminishes the strength of the society. I mean, we've seen countries that have praised the fact that they eradicated, Down syndrome, but really they just aborted the babies that had it. They said those individuals that have Down syndrome are of no value and should not have a chance at life. And you talk to anyone that has a Down syndrome child, and the contributions that that child makes, the way that it makes you a different person, the outlook that it gives you in life, it's just so overwhelming. And it's changed all of the people that that individual with Down syndrome has been around. And
Mhm.
so to take that away from a society, to learn from other people, to see the differences in other people, is it weakens the society, and it sends such an alarming message, and it's very, very, very discouraging. And I just think the more we can speak out against that and highlight the values that all individuals have and what they bring to the table, I think can kind of help combat that.
Yes, yes, and amen. It is so important, and just seeing the tide of other Western countries go in this direction of rationing healthcare, of physician-assisted suicide that many people with disabilities
Yeah.
become victim of what you're talking about. I think the country of Iceland that aborted all, but I think one. There's one survivor of a woman with Down syndrome
Mm.
in that Atlantic story. Um, it's so critical that I think just continuing the drumbeat, and I'm really grateful for all the writing that you do on this topic, the speaking, and we will continue to highlight your work because it's just so important that more people know about it. I'm going to end our time with a question about back to your story with your daughter and your hopes and dreams for her. So, what are your hopes and dreams for her future?
Oh, that's a great question. If she was listening, she would be intrigued to see what I had to say about that. I really just think, and I kind of instill this with all of my girls, this giving them the courage to advocate for themselves and speak up. And I think a lot of times children can be timid, or a lot of generations really just rely on their parents to advocate for them or to do things for them. And I've really tried to instill in them using their voice to advocate for what is right. And, I hope that she can see someday that I did that to the best of my ability and do the same for herself, and then advocate for others, like other people that maybe are younger or timid or don't have the opportunity, and use that voice to do right and to speak out. Because the more of us that speak out and criticize, honestly, this evil that's happening in these communities, it will make a huge difference. And so I just hope for her that she will have that courage and will be brave enough to be able to speak out against what's wrong. It doesn't have to be in the disability community, it doesn't have to be healthcare policy, but in general in life, to be courageous in order to speak out and advocate for what's right, even when you're the only person doing it, which is so hard. Let me tell you, on some of these boards that I sat on, I was the only individual that was on the right, that was very vocal. And a lot of times they were so focused on pushing a political agenda and not actually helping the patient. And I would oppose it. I mean, I was one of the few people that would constantly vote against the chairman's policies and provisions that he was trying to champion. And I would just say, this has nothing to do with helping people with disabilities. This is all political, and you're trying to score points. And
Mm.
I mean, I would get the call after the committee hearing, and they would lecture me and they would bully me. And, I've seen it all. And it's hard sometimes to be that one person to stand up. But at the end of the day, when you do the right thing and it matters, it makes a difference. And if you're not going to have the courage to stand up, nobody else will.
That is a amazing closing call to action, Mary. And I think that courage for all of us and wherever we're called to be and take action and do the right thing is so beautiful. And thank you for devoting so much of your life to that. And I know your daughters are going to see it and hopefully continue on that legacy. But that's a beautiful message. And we continue to follow your work, promote your work, and hear about the great impacts that you're making for this.
Thank you. It was such an honor being able to be here with you. I'd love to come back.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mary.